Hello, my name is Kelly Lemon and I'm a property investor, and this video is all about the top 5 mistakes that I see new investors make when investing in property. Property, real estate, buy-to-let property, any of those terms apply, but these are the top 5 mistakes that I see people make, and I'm going to share them with you in this video. So like I said, my name is Kelly Lemon. I'm a buy-to-let landlord. I've got a portfolio of properties and I've been investing for about 20 years. So this is an area that I know well, that I'm very passionate about. And listen, it's absolutely fine to make mistakes, but I've made loads of mistakes, loads and loads of mistakes. In fact, all of my loans have come from mistakes. But when someone can tell you heads up for these mistakes, it's so much better than having to learn the hard way. Now, obviously it's up to you. If you want to learn the hard way, crack on and learn the hard way. However, these are some things that I've learned, and it's things that I see over and over again when I see new investors, not even new investors actually, but some very early on in their property journey making, and I just want to say, no, you don't need to make those mistakes. So that's why I'm making this video. So with all that being said, let me start with mistake number 1. So number one is basically believing the hype. And what I mean by that is there are loads of videos, courses, people out there that say one thing, and actually it's not the reality of an actual property investment. And I found in my journey, when I learned about property, when I went to training courses, I really believed it. I believed a lot of what they said. And actually, when I went out and started applying it, I realised the reality is so different. So let me give you a perfect example. So with one of my early properties I purchased, it was a 3-storey property that I converted into a HMO. And a HMO, if you don't know, is a house of multiple occupation. And what that means is instead of having a property that you let to one person or one family, it's actually a property that you create different rental units within it. And you rent it to multiple people. So that's what HMO is, but there's more information on that on other videos. That's not really the focus of this one. The point is, that's what I decided to do with this property, and that's exactly what I did. Now, when I learned about HMOs and when I learned about different things, I was told that you do a HMO and then you get a commercial valuation. Don't worry if you don't understand what that means, because later on in the story, you don't need to know what it means. But and then you kind of walk away with this just big pot of money. And actually nothing could be further from the truth, because the reality is quite often you don't get commercial valuations, and that's a whole other discussion for another video. But the point being, what they told me, the hype, actually there was no substance to it. And I found out in that situation that the way I planned to release the funds so I could then purchase the next property that I was already obligated to didn't work. And it completely left me with my back against the wall. In fact, that is actually when I started raising private finance, because in that situation I had to find a solution really quickly, and that's when I started raising finance. But the point being, don't believe don't believe what people tell you necessarily. And I remember once going to an event, and we were talking about commercial valuations, because in property that's an area that people talk about quite a lot. And I was talking to this person, and he was explaining how you do this and this and this and this. And then I asked him, how often have you done this? Have you ever done it? And the answer was no. And I realised that you have this whole industry of people talking about things, and really it's just like Chinese whispers, passing on these myths or these things, etc., that aren't necessarily rooted in reality or rooted in experience. So that's the first mistake that I see people make, is they believe what people tell them. And not only do they believe it, but they base their whole strategy on it, and they don't have other exits in case actually plan A doesn't happen. And not only do they believe plan A, but they don't necessarily understand the logic or the mechanics behind plan A. They just blindly believe it. So that is the first mistake that I see people make when they invest in property. The second mistake, and this could be property, this could be anything actually, is trusting the wrong people. And unfortunately that happens. I have trusted people in the past, and I have been wrong about those people, and I have paid very, very dearly for those mistakes. And the thing is, when you are investing in real estate or property, the reality is you do need other people. Quite often you'll need builders, you'll need contractors, you'll need estate agents, you'll need brokers, you'll need a whole power team of people. And whenever you're working with people, whenever you're working with relationships, quite often they break down. Quite often people say they'll do something and they don't do it. And it's just a very difficult situation. In fact, I've encountered this situation so much that even though I've been investing in property for the last 20 years, I actually became an accredited mediator where I resolve property conflicts. And I've even come up with a system, not for this video, but a system that helps you spot conflicts or challenges and kind of how you deal with them, because it's so common. So the second mistake that I see people make is trusting the wrong people. And there are ways around that. There are things that you can do to mitigate those risks. There are things that you can do that when that risk starts rearing its ugly head, how you deal with it quickly and kind of effectively. But quite often when people are investing in property, they say, oh, don't worry, we don't need agreements. They're family, they're friends, we've known them for years, etc., etc. Please be careful. That is absolutely a mistake that I see people make, and it happens time and time and time and time again. So whenever you are dealing with people, quite often there are challenges and people don't do what they're supposed to do. So plan for it, expect it. Don't be naive and think it won't happen to you, because it's very likely that it will. So that's the second mistake that I see people make. The third mistake that I see people make, particularly investors that are based in an area that's got very expensive property or real estate, and they will then go to areas that they don't know or understand because they're looking for cheap, because cheap means profitable. And the reality is it doesn't always mean profitable. And all of the lessons that I teach people about what you look for when you're investing in property, all of those apply if you're in a cheap area or an expensive area. Because when you buy a property, in essence, you've made a real commitment then. Even if you're flipping it, even if you're selling it on, even if you're refurbishing it and selling it on or doing whatever with it, you've still got this asset. And when you buy a property or real estate, if you don't buy correctly, you're going to pay the price with real money. So like I say, a lot of people look at it and they go, that's cheap. But it's still money. And not only is it still money, particularly if you're using mortgages or leverage, people go, well, I'm not investing much. And I'm like, but you are, because you're on the hook for the rest of it. So to give you an example, I remember one of my early properties, I actually bought a masonette flat in a block. And it was really cheap and it yielded really well. And what I mean by yield is that it gave me a good return in relation to the asset price. And by the way, below I'll put a link for a Jargon Buster PDF and video. So if ever I say words that you don't understand, feel free to go through that at your own leisure and kind of get your head around those words. But so it did yield really well. But actually, even though it was cheap, it was in a very cheap block. And it was quite run down. There's been loads of issues with the management and with the freeholder. And then looking at the other tenants or owner occupiers in the block has had a negative impact on my property and my tenant type. So actually that was a really good learning for me early on, that cheap doesn't always mean profitable. And it may be profitable on paper. And quite often, I mean, I love spreadsheets. So quite often I will look at it and I will look at an asset and I will look at the financial return. But what you've also got to factor in is the hassle factor of kind of getting it let. And like I say, this property was a perfect example. I mean, actually, it's no longer an issue. But in the early days, I was like, yeah, it's really profitable, But actually, if you factor in all the work or time or hassle factor, then no, there's other assets I've got that are more profitable. So that would be the third mistake that I see investors make. The fourth mistake is trying to do everything yourself. Now, I can be guilty of that. I have to say, when it comes to property investment, I'm not that guilty of it because I'm not very good. I remember years and years and years ago, very early on when I was investing in property, and I thought, this is an industry that I'm going to be in. I've got property, I want to become more handy. And I remember going and taking a 2-day tiling course, which taught me how to tile. And it was really, really hard work. I've never been on my knees for so long, and it was painful. And I remember going and taking these newfound skills and the equipment that I needed to buy and tiling a section of a kitchen in a rental property. And it took me a really long time. It looked good to me, but I don't think if I'd paid someone to do that job, I wouldn't have said that. So that's me saying it wasn't a particularly great job. and all of those hours could have been used elsewhere. So I learned pretty early on in my property journey that I'm not very good at doing things, particularly when it comes to handy things. And actually that's been really good, because what I am very good at is I'm really good at understanding, learning things, distilling information, raising finance, understanding the numbers, understanding how you can add value, loads of other things that are actually very high value when it comes to building your own property investment portfolio. So, but loads of people I see, they want to save money, which I understand, to do the work themselves, but there's loads of challenges with that. It takes a lot of time, and actually the money that you're saving, when you look at it in terms of the amount of time it takes you and what you could be doing with that time, it's not always a great situation. In fact, a perfect example of this is we had a property that I'd actually found for somebody else. So I managed it, and the landlord wanted to, I think it was do the painting themselves. And they really like painting and all those sorts of things. Now, I remember having a chat with that person saying, but your day rate at your work is X. A day rate for a painter is Y. You're losing money by doing this, and we haven't even factored in all of the other things, the materials, the mind space, the time, etc., 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 and they just couldn't see it. So that's something I see all the time, is people want to do everything themselves, and what comes with that actually is they take it personally, and that's the fifth mistake I would say that I see people make in property, is being way too personal with their investment properties. It's really difficult to stay detached, but it's absolutely what you need to do, because really when you are developing or refurbishing or buying or putting furniture in or kitting out a property, you're doing it for your tenant type, and you may not, very likely won't be your ideal tenant. And I have seen this time and time and time again. I've got a lettings agency, so we manage properties, and I can always tell when a landlord has been really heavily involved. And ultimately, when you're buying property or you're investing in property, you're the business owner. You don't necessarily want to be the person that's doing all those things. And linked to this fifth mistake is not just taking it personally, but also overdeveloping a property. Now, I invest in HMOs, and quite often I will take a property, and a HMO is a house of multiple occupation. I will convert it into 6 rooms or however many rooms, and there's a cost to doing that. Now, a lot of people like to do this strategy, and I understand why, because it's a lot more profitable. But there is a sweet spot, and there's also an understanding of your local market, because if you overdevelop a property, you're actually just putting more and more money in that you're just not going to get out. Now, if you look at it through a very personal lens, that's when that mistake happens. But also, quite often that mistake happens. Remember I said mistake one about, believing the hype, is people just think, this is the way to do it, and I'm just going to put toilets in every bedroom, bathrooms, en suites, kitchenettes, this. And they, in essence, they overdevelop a property. And where you have to be really careful of this is your location, because when you, generally speaking, are investing further north of the country, there's a danger, and I've seen it multiple times with investors. And somebody said this to me really early on in my journey, actually. They just said it as a passing comment. And I was so grateful for this piece of advice, because I've always come back to this, which is, if you've got a property in a certain area, it will cap at a certain value. It doesn't really matter. Even if you paint the walls with gold, it will have a ceiling price. And if you put too much money into it and you overdevelop it, then you're going to go above that ceiling price, and then you're in a deficit, and that's actually a real problem for all sorts of reasons. And the other thing is if you overdevelop a property, if you take a normal 3-4 bedroom property, family house, and you, what I would say, overdevelop it, the problem then is you put yourself into too much of a niche. So then that property can't be used for anything else. So the challenge with that is that if you want multiple exits, which is something I would highly recommend when you're investing in property, or the market changes, or the niche changes, or whatever it may be, or the tenant demographic, you've really kind of got yourself stuck and backed into a bit of a corner. So overdeveloping for me is something I see all the time. And I literally see investors, and they talk to me about their plans, and I'm like, what is the basis, and why are you spending that much money? Why are you doing this much work? Tell me what the return's going to be, and what's the difference in the return if you don't do that work. And then let's take that 20 quid a month difference, and let's compound it and see what we do with it. So those are the 5 mistakes. I would say believing the hype, that's mistake number 1. Trusting the wrong people, mistake number 2. Thinking that cheap is profitable, mistake number 3. Trying to do everything yourself, mistake number 4. And overdeveloping and taking it personally, I would say, is mistake number 5. So those are the 5 top mistakes that I see new investors make when they start investing in property because they're super excited. One thing that I've created that I think will be super helpful is a property investment checklist. And this checklist is a PDF that kind of starts to sieve out some of the mistakes that you could be making at these early stages and kind of gets your mind focused, because I think when people invest in property, it can be like really overwhelming. There's loads of things to think about, and this checklist kind of brings it all down to a central point. So that resource is there for you. If you download that, or when you download that, you'll also then join my community, and there's a link for that below, because at the moment I'm building a property community. Anybody who's interested in real estate, investing in property, already investing in property, and just kind of want a bit of a community, that's what that's there for, and that's where you can learn a bit more about my journey. You can ask questions, and it can be a very lonely journey, property investment. So that's kind of why I'm building this, and I'm building these resources, and also I'm teaching people as I go, because like I say, I've learned loads over the last 20 years, mainly through mistakes, but certainly by being on the ground. And a lot of what I learned in the courses, in all honesty, you know, I would say a good 80% doesn't apply. So much of it is theory, and it's not actual reality. So I hope you found that video useful. I hope if you are investing in property, don't let it put you off. It's a fantastic way to build your wealth, and I've made another video on why I think that, but also just be aware of some of the common pitfalls that investors make. My name is Kelly Lemon, and I hope that you enjoyed this video.